be walking you through RESTful web services. So, before starting with RESTful web services, let's talk about what exactly web service is. So for this, I would like to give you a simple example of a web service which we often use daily, and that's Cricinfo. So when we use Cricinfo, what exactly we do? We give Cricinfo the cricket ID, and it returns us with scorecard in form of XML, JSON, RSS feed, anything. So that's what exactly on a very high level web service is. Let's move to another example. Suppose you want to travel, maybe on a business tour or on holidays. So what you do? You book a cab, you reach airport, you board aeroplane, you get down at your destination, again catch cab, get into hotel. So for this, you open browser, and through browser you log on to a vacation subsystem. Now from there you do cab booking, you do aeroplane booking, and then you do hotel booking. Now if suddenly one of this process gets cancelled and you are not aware of it, maybe it doesn't get cancelled because you intentionally wanted it to be cancelled, but because of some reason, and then you are in soup because you are not aware of it. So in such scenario, what exactly you want? You want some system to notify you about cancellation or about some alternate arrangements to be made. And here's web service come into picture. So you want some automated system to interact with this vacation subsystem and notify you with SMS or email, so that you can alternate arrangement, or the notification is about alternate arrangement made by the system, and that prevents you from getting into soup. And that's what web service is all about. So web service is nothing but, in web service you require every machine to interact with each other about all the resources on all other machines in the world, in a simplest way. Now let's move on to RESTful web services. I would like to find this RESTful web services in terms of layman. So imagine that you are in a company and you want to update your address. So what you do? You go to your HR, you tell her your employee ID. Based on that employee ID, she takes out the file from the drawer, updates your address, what you provide, and puts back the file into the drawer. Now tomorrow you want to actually verify whether she has updated your address correctly. You again go to her, you again provide her your ID and get your address. This is the HR service for you. Now similarly, if you want to check your salary balance or anything related to finance, then you go to account section and again provide your ID and get your salary. That's account service for you. So that's essence of REST. So for each and every functionality there are different endpoints. So for address updation you have HR as your service endpoint. For finance related salary you have account section as your endpoint. So in REST, different functionality, different endpoints. Let's move ahead. Now this REST can also be defined in terms of organized structure. Everybody basically likes to keep the data on his hard disk in a very organized way. So suppose if you are asked to keep data about users of an organization, what you will do? You will create a directory named organization. Within it you will create a directory named users. Then you will get directories for individual users with their IDs, similar to what is shown on the slide. So now whenever somebody asks you about the address of user 1, you will open organization folder, you will then open users, open folder 1 and get the address, and this is what is shown on the slide. So if somebody asks you for address of user 2, you are not going to open folder with ID 1, and definitely you are going to open folder with ID 2. So here address of user 1 has a unique path. We can call it as unique URI. So same logic can be applied to web. Now if I want to get all users of a particular company, my URL will be http://xyz.com/users. Now if I want to get user with ID 1, then my request will be xyz.com/user/1. If I want to get address of user 1, then it will be just 1/address. So here you will observe that every resource has a unique URI, a unique identifier. That's principle number 1 for REST. Each and every resource is identified by a unique URI, as you are seeing. See how the request and response is. Now suppose I want user with ID 1. Then I have to give get request, and here's the get request for you. Get user/1. The protocol is HTTP, and most important thing I am mentioning is the accept header. By using this accept header, I am actually telling server, look, I am going to accept the response only in form of application/XML, and here's the response for you. Here's a post request. Here actually it should be post. I'm sorry about that. So when I make a post request, the most important thing here I am mentioning is the content type, which says that I am posting data which is in form of XML. And the second header, which is accept, which is saying that I am going to accept response which will be in form of application XML. And here's the post response for you. So this is on a high level how request and response in the REST are. So I would like to mention one more point here. Suppose I want to update user with ID 1. Normally what developers do it is they create a method called update user, and then the URL is changed accordingly. So it becomes like xyz.com/users/update user 1. But the essence of REST lies here. Even if you want to update user with ID 1, you are going to use same URI, which is http xyz.com/users/1. If you want to update the address of user 1, again you are not going to change URI, you are going to use the same URI, which is xyz.com/users/1/address. So how is server going to come to know that that you have to update, or you have to update the address, you have to update user with ID 1? Because here we are using the same URIs, and here HTTP comes to our rescue. To update user with ID 1, we are actually going to use the same URI, http xyz.com/users/1, but here we are going to use HTTP method post and not get, as we did before. So all sources in REST are actually nouns, as you can see, and the actions like update, delete are taken care by HTTP. So REST is nothing but the architectural style over HTTP protocol. So two important principles of web are: each and every resource is identified by a unique URI, and each and every resource is noun, and action is actually taken care by HTTP. Basically, the actions which we take are the CRUD actions: create, retrieve, update, delete, and corresponding HTTP methods like put, post, delete, get. Lies the analogy. So here's the HTTP. So you can see HTTP headers, HTTP body, the request made, and the 4 verbs for every: get, post, put, delete. So if a particular user want to get a customer with ID 123, he is going to use the same URI with a get request. If you want to create a customer with ID 123, again he is going to use the same URI with put request. Again, if you want to delete the customer with ID 123, he is going to use the same URI with delete, and to update he is going to use post. Now we just saw request and response in form of XML. The data was actually being represented in form of XML. What if all the data in the web can be represented in form of a list and map? You take example of users in organization. The representation can be users as key and list of all users as value. So it's key value map and list of all users as list. So generally every data can be easily represented in form of list and map, and that's JSON. In JSON we actually represent data in form of list and map. It's very lightweight than that of XML, and the USP of JSON is it is naturally consumed by JavaScript. If you just call a JavaScript eval on your JSON response, it is directly going to get directly going to get the object structure, the DOM structure, actually the object structure. So JavaScript's eval function naturally consumes JSON, and you don't have to use any special parser for it. So that's being naturally consumed. It's the USP of JSON. Using JSON, you can easily Ajaxify your request. Here is how JSON looks like. So your result JSON is going to, here is the user, which is key, and the list of users as a list. Again, within each user you have key value pair, ID1, name Laukik, address Pune, skill Java, and all that. And now if you just say result.users of 0.name, it is going to correspond to Laukik. And this result is nothing but JSON object which we get by using eval function. Let's move forward ahead. So using eval, the malicious JavaScript can easily be passed by eavesdropper, and that is going to get evaluated, as eval just consumes any JavaScript. So to prevent and again to validate whether the response is in a proper JSON form, you can use JSON parser. Number of JSON parsers are available in the site json.org. And here's the rest for you. So you have a resource. This resource can be represented in any forms: XML, JSON, HTML, or TOM. And these resources can be acted upon, or the actions can be are taken care by HTTP get, put, post, and delete. So the full form is the Representational State Transfer Protocol. So representation is the representation of resource in number of form, and state is nothing but we are just concerned about the state, and the actions are taken care by HTTP. So it's a Representational State Transfer Protocol. You have a site called programmableweb.com, wherein there are 3000 plus web service APIs available. And here's the snapshot of the same. So programmableweb.com/API/directory, and you will find number of APIs. So you can easily develop your own mashup. So whenever the API is developed, it is registered here. So you can easily develop clients for the APIs available. You can see Hoptoad, 1 login, Blue, Tell, 100 facts about me, etc., etc. Let's move on to another slide. Next slide. Now, how to implement these RESTful web services? So whenever we want to implement a RESTful web services, developer generally is going to proceed with writing a servlet, then implement its do get, do post, do delete, then write the business logic, and then create the messages, and that too JSON, as we seen before. So when we write servlet, we have to actually extract data like request.get parameter. We have to set the session, request.get headers, and all this boilerplate code needs to be written by our own. Then we have to again pass the URL, and then we have to perform our business logic. After performing business logic, we have to actually write state of the response object in form of JSON message to be returned. And this all is very difficult and time consuming for the developer, and developer is really going to get bored doing all these things by himself, by his own. So for that, JAX comes to our rescue. So if you use servlet, If we use EJB, we are actually marrying our code to the API. We actually implement HTTP servlet. But JAX-RS is POJO, and that's great standalone thing. JAX-RS is JSR 311 Java specification. It comes built in with JDK 6, so we can harmlessly use it as it is available. So how's the flow of JAX-RS? On a high level, JAX-RS servlet receives the HTTP request. It extracts a JSON from the request. There is a JAX-B annotation of @XML root element, which converts that JSON message into actual POJO model, which were, and then the business logic is. And same is the reverse. So POJO model gets converted into JSON, and JSON is ultimately sent through HTTP response. So let's look at the code for the same. Okay. So here's the code. Now, suppose we have a Scrap Simple website, and as a user I want to get all the scraps from that website. So here's the implementation service for the same. So let's look at the first element, @path/scraps. So this tells that whenever the request ends with /scraps, you have to point to this service, scrap service implementation. For example, if the path is like http xyz.com/scraps, so if the path is like this, hit scrap service implementation. So once the code or the flow enters scrap service implementation, it is going to check for the method. Now when we want to get all the scraps, okay, so if you want to get the scrap for a user 1, then we have a get request. So seeing the get request, it's going to go to this method, and it is annotated with @get. Now look at the next parameter, which is curly bracket user curly bracket end. So this denotes that the request is dynamic. So this user is actually the ID of user, and the request is like http xyz.com/scraps/1. So this 1 is actually the user ID, and it gets injected here. So this path param is synchronized with this path, and whatever is the user ID automatically gets injected here, and we actually call our business logic DAO.getScraps. So here's how the get request works in JAX-RS. Now suppose if we want to post a particular user, that is we want to create a particular user, then we use post request. As we use post request, it sees the annotation post, then it sees the next parameter, that's user. So the request will be like something like this, but the method is post. And one important annotation is @consumes. So this tells that this particular method is going to consume the data which is in form of application JSON, that is, it is going to consume JSON data. This is how the post request works. As I told before, this path parameter corresponds to this path user, and the JAX-B element plays an important role of serialization of the JSON message into the scrap entry object. So here's how the scrap entry is. So this is our model of scrap entry, and it is annotated by XML root element, the same XML root element mentioned here. So the annotation XML root element, though written XML, does serialization of both XML and JSON. It is just to tell JAX-RS that the message coming should be serialized into this particular object. and not it has nothing to do specifically with XML. The XML or JSON is going to be taken care by the annotation consumes. So on a high level, this is how our JAX-RS code works. Let's move forward. Now, Spring also comes with provider for JAX-RS. As JAX-RS is a Java specification, Spring is one of the provider of that specification. Spring REST works basically on the principle of same that of Spring MVC. So your request is first intercepted by dispatcher servlet, then it gives it to handler mapping decides which controller to forward the request to. Your request is then forwarded to appropriate controller. Controller returns model and logical view name. View resolver resolves that logical view name into actual view, and this is how Spring MVC works. Spring REST also works on the same principle, just that the view resolver and view are replaced by negotiated view-based rendering and HTTP message converter. Rest all remains the same. So let's move on to code. So here's the scrap service Spring implementation. This denotes that it's controller. Request mapping is same as that of path in JAX-RS. Then here's the get request view, which denotes request mapping. Value is /user, the dynamic URL. This denotes a method. This denotes the response status, and @response body annotation takes care of serialization and deserialization. So @response body indicates Spring that this scrap list needs to be serialized. Similarly, post and so on. Now, suppose you have been working on RESTful web services. You have created your RESTful web services. You have written good Java doc, and everything is fine and working. One fine day, comes to you and says, "Look, we have a client, and client needs a very good documentation of your web service." And then you start rushing here and there, searching for technical writers and googling out how to write the exact HTML documentation and all. But what if somebody provides you a very good HTML documentation of your API within 5 to 10 minutes? Not even minutes, it's just 5 to 10 seconds, and that's Initiate for you. So you just give your web service API as input to Initiate. Initiate is basically a tool. It is a build time tool. You just run Initiate tool on your web service API, and you get web service API plus full HTML documentation plus client side libraries, everything. If you can see. So Initiate not only gives you the full HTML documentation, but it is going to give you client-side libraries for Java, C, Objective-C, .NET, Java, JSON, everything. Not only that, it's going to generate endpoints for JAX-RS, SOAP, GWT, and AMF. So this is all Initiate does for you. So Initiate is basically an engine for dynamically enhancing your Java Web Service API. It is primarily a build time tool. It is developed for your web service API. You have developed your own web service API, and then Initiate works on the top of it. You have to just attach Initiate to your build process. Okay. Now, here is the RESTful web services for you. Now let's move on to next topic, which is cross-site scripting. Now suppose you are hosting a site called geochirp.com, and you have to write a mashup, and you have to make AJAX call to different APIs. Suppose you are writing geochirp.com, wherein you want to know your location and tweet your location. For that you need maps.google.com and twitter.com. But if you are hosting your site on say xyz.com, then you cannot make AJAX call to the site which is abc.com, which is on another domain. This is because of single origin policy of a browser. So If you want to write a mashup using Ajax call to the sites which are on different domain, it can't be done as it is because browser's single origin policy doesn't allow it. So single origin policy is actually imposed by browser. It puts Ajax restrictions on Ajax call from one domain to another, as you see abc.com to xyz.com. Again, you cannot import an iframe from a totally different domain. Not allowed at all. You cannot access iframe's DOM for the iframe which belongs to totally different domain. So what can be workaround? You can use your own proxy for that. So you make call to your proxy, and then the proxy, which is the server, actually makes call to maps.google.com and twitter.com. But this is actually not good, and this can make your application actually very slow, which you don't want. So what's the answer for this? Answer for this is JSON-P. Here is how JSON-P works. So Ajax calls are not allowed by browser, but you can easily import the static JavaScripts from xyz.com to your abc.com. So JSON-P is nothing but JSON rendered in form of JavaScript. So if you just change your script call to a dynamic, that means you just add a callback equal to my function to it, then your JSON-P is going to work. Let's see how it works. So you are just going to include JavaScripts which are hosted on another domain. So if you just give a call to xyz.com services/user/1 and it is going to return you JSON, that's not allowed because of single origin policy. But you can easily attach a variable called callback and get a JavaScript function as a response, and there is no restriction for you. So JSON rendered in JavaScript is nothing but JSON-P. So when you give a call as shown here, it just renders you a JavaScript function, and this JavaScript function gets called on your site, and you are done with. You have achieved whatever you want. So for this, you actually want the sites on other domain to be hosted which are capable of responding JSON-P responses. Here's the JSON-P code example. So here what you do is you include a script tag, and here's your script. So what your script says is JSON-P equal to myfunc. So whatever the JSON response is on xyz.com services, it is just getting wrapped by a function called myfunction. Here is the myfunction. So this is actually going to call your function myfunc data, and your table is going to get updated easily. So this is how you can access cross domains. Now let's look at XSS. XSS is actually a cross-site scripting. Let's see how it happens. So I am a user and I am logging in into a scrapbook website. It's not actually Orkut. Orkut is not at all vulnerable to XSS. So this is just a dummy picture which I have taken. So Orkut is actually not vulnerable to XSS. Just for example, I have taken this snapshot. So user logs in to Orkut, and there is an attacker which just adds a certain script to it. So when you log in and you refresh your page, you automatically get hacked. Let's see how it happens. So I start server, and then I move on to my site. this is my scrapbook login. So I log Rohit. Here's this is actually not a very well arranged site, but just for example, for demo purpose. So now, as a user, I just write some scrap on my account, and I say submit. It gets added. So I say hi all. It gets added. Now, let's say there is a hacker, and he adds this particular script on my scrapbook. Say images are equal to something, and he just pushes it on my scrapbook and says submit. And now let's see what happens. I just say hack. Wow, my site actually got hacked. So let's take a look what actually was added by the hacker. Sorry. So hacker actually added this script which says http localhost 8080 hack app hackhandler.2, and he actually encoded my cookie. So he gets access to my cookie and he can hack it. This is how it looks. So that's cross-site scripting. How to do cross-site scripting? For doing cross-site scripting, your server should have a cross-site scripting vulnerability. That means you are using inner HTML text area.value, and if somebody adds any script in this text area and posts, then your site can easily get hacked. Basically, your site should be vulnerable such that people can easily get access to your cookie. That's what we did. So somebody says look at this cool image which is encoding URI and document.cookie. So he is going to easily get access to your cookie whenever you log into that scrap. Now let's move on to cross-site request forgery. So let's see how it happens. So user logs in and attacker sends him mail with a script. So once user logs in and attacker sends him a mail with a script, he opens the mail and he gets hacked. How it happens? So when user logs in, browser holds your session. So when browser is holding your session and somebody sends you a mail and makes you visit the page which that user has sent you, then he can easily use your session from the same browser to hack you. It's possible. So let's say I say mail.google.com. Actually close this.